I'm not gonna lie to you. It's hard to be surprised by how absurdly evil the US operates if you have like a real functioning knowledge of chattel slavery. And this is not a dig. Like, people are actively barred from better education and the totality of the horrors of chattel slavery because it allows them to like obfuscate how uniquely evil it was. This is one of the reasons why white separatists and Christian nationalists and conservatives love to bring up like, oh, there was already a slave trade. Africans were selling Africans. Arabs were selling Africans. Like, yes, there was an Arabic slave trade. There was an African slave trade, but they were not the same as the US's. They know that, which is why they're nostalgic for the time. A lot of people don't realize one of the reasons why race relations in the US isn't muddied the way that it is in Europe or in other colonies that they had is because we had no pathway to personhood. That was a unique quality of American slavery. Every other place had a path to citizenship or personhood. You can buy your way into freedom. You could breed your way into freedom. That's how we get like the mulatto. This was big in Spanish and Portuguese colonies. If you bred out enough African, you would be freed. If you married out, like in Brazil or in Portuguese colonies, you would be freed. No such thing existed here. It was the one drop rule. That matters. It's one of the reasons why historically, I don't see why we use like BIPOC language, because it's not about everybody else. And this isn't like in a good way, but it's the reality. Like, the US is very much still reconciling with a black-white racial conflict. The rest of y'all are collateral. That sounds mean, but it's the truth. And history shows us that, because even amongst its other enslaving white counterparts, the US was still, amongst their contemporaries, regarded as a uniquely evil form of enslaver with very stringent race relations. And all of it is contemporary. We are living in derivatives and replications of the plantation every day. And I'm thinking about it a lot because seeing these people be like extrajudiciously deported, whether or not they're citizens, whether or not they're here illegally, borders aren't real. I don't care about them. But you get what I mean. This like no tolerance policy of the other is like really fascinating if you know like how much work it took to maintain the power of whiteness. The fact that post-enslavement, after the Reconstruction period, they had to restructure what whiteness was because of their numbers. And it's the racial anxieties accompanied by white folks' fear of black retaliation that led to them subsuming other groups that were not considered white into their own as a self-preservation tactic. This is where we see them giving the Irish and the Italians and the Jewish people a chance to like audition into whiteness to bulk their numbers. And this is something they've been thinking about for a long time. It's why the Great Replacement theory is literally the bedrock of conservatism. This is just a contemporary version of white enslavers being absurdly cruel and then writing in their diaries about how they fear about being killed by their like slaves at night. This is just that with Google. But one of the other reasons why they make sure that people don't know the full scope of chattel slavery in the American context is to see like where it was failed otherwise when people would try to replicate it elsewhere. After the Civil War, tens of thousands of white enslavers took their plantations, uprooted them, and placed them in Brazil because, not so fun fact, I guess, Brazil was the last in the West to abolish slavery. They didn't get rid of it until 1888. They were also the colony with the most enslaved Africans total. This is why the largest black population outside of the continent of Africa is Brazil. When these white enslavers got there, again, fleeing, having to get rid of their plantations, they wrote endlessly about how homesick they were, not just because of things like the climate and the fact that they weren't allowed to fully replicate the same plantations. Like, for instance, a lot of them wanted to grow cotton. You can't do that in a subtropical climate like Brazil. But explicitly, their biggest gripe with Brazil was with its race relations because they had a freed black population. Because Brazil, a Portuguese colony, was one where you could breed out blackness, you could buy out of enslavement. There was a path to citizenship. They were considered people there, and that was something white enslavers physically couldn't conceive of. It's quite literally what led to tens of thousands of them coming back to the States. A few successfully settled there. That's why you get the town of Americana in Brazil. That's how you get this like ethnic group considered the Confederados, which are the descendants of these previously enslavers who then started to mix with the local, Brazilian population over time. And one of the reasons why the Confederados and Americana settlement is at the top of my mind is that when these tens of thousands of homesick, like middle class, they weren't like the most wealthy, but semi-wealthy white enslavers were done with their like Brazilian project, they petitioned the US to help subsidize their travel back because they spent all their money trying to replicate their plantations in Brazil. And the US did! Like, the US literally helped pay to repatriate these enslavers back to the States, specifically back to the South. And it's this knowledge that blows my mind all the time, where it's like my tax dollars, your tax dollars are being used to send people wherever the fuck this administration wants them to go. And this is the same country that was like paying out reparations to white enslavers for loss of product and income. The same country that when after a civil war had tens of thousands of defectors leave to maintain slavery, they helped pay to bring back. That's this country's legacy. That's why always say the US is profoundly unique in its evil. Our race relations are very clear. This is not like a brown, black, like melting pot struggle. This is all about reminding Black people our ultimate place, which is as being a proprietary force for white America. Everyone else is essentially just collateral. You have to get everyone else out because they are amongst us. But also, if there are less of the brown, less groups in between us, it'll be much easier to legislate and navigate a white-black racial caste system, which is why they are deeply nostalgic for the American past, because uniquely speaking, within the context of transatlantic slavery, we were the ones with the harshest, most violent race politic. And that's what they are seeking again. Race relations is the very reason why our left politics is considered the right in Europe. This country is soulless for a reason. And this isn't to say that Europe didn't have its problems. Again, they are the reason we had these colonies. They're a reason that many people speak Spanish, that a quarter of the world is francophone, why folks who should have never heard about a pope have Catholic names. But ultimately, this is just the pot of racial violence and terror boiling over finally post-Civil War. Because it's not enough that they didn't punish the South. They were actively rewarding them, giving them positions of power and telling them to just replicate what they needed quietly. And that's what happened. And we're living in the after of that. And I think if more people had a better education about the totality of chattel slavery in the American context, they would be less occupied with preserving the perceived soul of the country and more interested in, after this shit burns down, what can we build that's better? I've been begging y'all to get woke on transatlantic slavery for so long, and Reconstruction specifically for so long, for this purpose. Because the Black folks who were allowed to have this education, we knew time was a ticking, and the time is now.